So the final artist we're going to talk about from the High Renaissance is Raphael. And I had spoken to the fact that these three artists, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael, they all kind of had their own personalities. With Raphael, I would describe him as kind of the man about town, very elegant, very classy, a dandy, one might say. And he was very good with people. Where Michelangelo was very bad with people, Raphael was very good with people. And they weren't that far apart in age, so it was said that like Raphael sometimes kind of like swooped in and kind of would say to patrons like, "Oh, Michelangelo's being kind of a jerk to you, huh? And oh, he's not a painter anyway. You know that, right?" Like he would try to ingratiate himself, where Michelangelo never did. He was very much like, kind of difficult to deal with. We assume Michelangelo got away with his personality and his behavior because he was as awesome as he was, right? But Raphael used the tactic of why not be kind of more approachable, accessible, available. And that leads to our discussion of his famous painting, The School of Athens. Now, the School of Athens painting was one of four that was commissioned for the papal apartments. Papal refers to Pope, so this was something created for the Pope's apartments. And the Pope originally asked for four different subjects: philosophy, theology, law, and poetry. The School of Athens is the philosophy painting. Now, where I bring up Raphael would often ingratiate himself, it's said that a lot of the other artists who were supposed to do the other paintings started to drop out, and he just gracefully was like, well, I'll do poetry too, He just sort of stepped into the void because he was just such an agreeable, kind of young man. But this is probably his most famous work, The School of Athens. And I wanted to use this really bad slide to show you that linear perspective obviously is used here as well. Hopefully you've noted that most of the works we've been looking at use linear perspective, the invention we talked about in our Florentine Renaissance discussion, because Renaissance artists are very much about order and logic, having things make sense. Later, we're going to go look at Mannerism and the Baroque, and we'll talk about how what seems to be very in favor or in fashion with one art style usually shifts with the next art style. So for instance, where Renaissance artists like order and perfection and things making sense, Mannerists will say, no, we like it not to make sense. And then Baroque artists will say, we like energy and action. So it seems that, we kind of swing back and forth like a pendulum with our stylistic interests, our stylistic likes, right? We get bored of things, we want something different. I used this image of the School of Athens here because I wanted you to see what it looked like before it was cleaned. I had mentioned before with, the Sistine Chapel, the huge difference that you can see when these artworks are cleaned. Notice here you probably would say jewel tones, darker colors, that kind of thing. But again, that's not true. I'll show you some other images that I took when I was at the Vatican after it was cleaned, where you can get a sense of, no, this is not the real coloration. But I wanted you to be able to have that compare contrast. The School of Athens, it's philosophy, right? So the subject matter is the great philosophers of the classical world. And in the center, right, you have Plato and Aristotle in the pink and the blue. I'll kind of focus in on them and say a little bit more there. And then to the left, of course, of Plato, you have people that would have been considered Platonic philosophers. And then to the right would be Aristotelian philosophers. I often find it interesting that a pope wanted this in his apartments. But it shows that the church, in my mind, in the Renaissance, was very open to understanding all areas of learning, all areas of understanding. So they might have been interested in looking back at the classics and looking at philosophy and entertaining what that school of thinking had to give, right? What it had to offer to them. If you think about the setting, it's highly classical, very, very Renaissance in its design and its usage. Now, as I mentioned, in the center of the painting, you have Plato and Aristotle, who are thought to be representative of the two schools, right, of philosophy of the Greeks. Plato believed in what he called the ideal forms, and he believed in the conceptual. He would walk around asking people, like, what is the ideal form of love? What is platonic love, right? And you'll notice that he gestures upward because he believed in these things that weren't concrete. They were very abstract in and very conceptual. Aristotle, you'll notice, is gesturing down to the earth, the flat palm kind of going down to the earth, because he believed in evidence. He believed that only things that could be proven and seen were of any interest to him. So he's gesturing down to the earth and saying, what can we prove? What is truth? What can I see? What is able to be tested over and over again? We call this the empirical method today. Can you do an experiment and test something and, see the same results over and over? So Plato, abstract, Aristotle, concrete. They're the two different sort of sides, right, of philosophy in a sense. And again, all the other philosophers are arranged around them. Now, if you're paying attention in School of Athens, Raphael did put in some cameos, we might say. So you have Michelangelo show up, you'll notice, in the front portion of the painting as Heraclitus. Now, what I love about his placement is you'll notice that Raphael made him a loner, like he was in real life, right? So Raphael liked his little joke, might we say. And then Raphael is actually to the right of the painting, kind of lurking, as I put it, behind Zoroaster and Ptolemy. And Raphael kind of is hanging out with the mathematicians and the scientists over on the Aristotelian side. And you'll notice that he put Michelangelo over on the Platonic side. So I also think he's kind of snubbing Michelangelo, saying that Michelangelo is somebody who doesn't believe in concrete evidence, but that Raphael does. So he's kind of pitting them against one another, just as Leonardo would have pitted himself against Michelangelo between the painting and sculptural debate. But this habit of putting yourself as a little portrait in the paintings, somewhere like that's not very noticeable, somewhere innocuous, is something we notice Renaissance artists liking to do. It's like kind of an interesting way of signing your painting, we might say. And again, it speaks to the kind of egos of the geniuses that these artists are now being seen as. So I'll leave you here. And then with the next module, we'll talk about the Northern Renaissance to finish off our Renaissance discussion.